Is it Molly or?
It's me. I'm recording.
Oh, hey,
Oh, you are
hey, Molly.
recording. Are you, Molly, are you also like letting people in the waiting room?
Yep, I will be in charge of that.
People here and a lot more rolling in. This is really exciting. Iskren, you're pulling in the crowds.
Oh,
Who are all these people? I'm so excited.
but thank you, Professor. But there was some kind of security update of Zoom, and that was the problem. But Jason, thank you. You're my deep consciousness. That okay.
All right, well, let me go ahead and introduce you. I mean, more people are rolling in. I mean, what is going on, Iskren? You must have a huge fan club. This is crazy.
Yeah, Professor. I mean,
This is crazy.
I invited a lot of people today because
Good, I'm glad.
Your initiative here, the Balkan Circle, is something like, the jewel of UT Austin, because
we have the hopes that it can be, but we've never had this many people in one session before. So I'm going to have to say this is because of your star power.
Okay.
So let me briefly just introduce myself and then Iskren, and then we can hand it over to Iskren to take it away. My name, for people who don't know me, is Mary Neuberger. You can probably see on the Zoom screen. This is a good Zoom thing. You can see each other's names. I am a professor of history here at UT, and I'm also the director of our Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies, and the chair of our Department of Slavic and Eurasian Studies. I'm the co-founder of the Balkan Circle, along with Kirill Abramov, who couldn't be here today, unfortunately, but who's usually here as my co-host. So today I'm really excited to have Iskren Ivanov giving a talk for us. Iskren is a Fulbright visiting scholar here at UT Austin. Believe it or not, he actually came to Austin to be a visiting scholar this semester, and we've even been able to see him in person a few times, even though we're remote. But he's a senior lecturer of US Russian foreign policy at Sofia University, St. Clement Ohridsky, which is obviously in Sofia, Bulgaria. And he's also an invited professor of Russian studies at the New Sorbonne University. He holds a PhD in political science and international relations from Sofia University, and a postgraduate degree in US national security from University of Delaware and West Point. Today, he's speaking on radicalization in Bulgaria, empirical research on US-Russian competition in Eastern Europe, which is a really exciting topic. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say today, Iskren. Take it away.
Thank you, Professor. I will start with the words of the former US President Jimmy Carter. Everything has been said, but not everyone has said it. Well, it's like that for the radicalization. Almost everything has been said about terrorism in religious studies and political studies, and a lot of definitions, but not everyone has said it. So today I'm going to say something more. Now, usually when scholars start their researches, they are more focused on their previous experience. But what I did with this research was that I did it with all my funds. It's self-funded research. It is an independent research, and it is in no way connected with security services or any other institutions in Bulgaria. So the data that you're going to see here are my data that I collected as a consequence of my interviews, in-person interviews, and a few other cover views that I did during my research. But first, let me start from the beginning to share my presentation with you. Okay, I think it's visible right now. Before starting my presentations, however, I would like to express a few gratitudes. First of all, my most special gratitudes go to a few of my Bulgarian colleagues and my Bulgarian students and a few friends from the embassy that joined us here today for our presentation. Добре дошли. Благодаря ви, че се присъединихте към нас. Sincere gratitude to Professor Mary Newberger for inviting me to the University of Austin, Texas. Now, I chose this university because I know that she is extremely devoted to Bulgarian scholars, and that Greece is one of the places where you can do not only a research, but also to share your research in a diversity of students, as I can see in my classes. Special thanks, of course, many thanks to my colleagues from Greece, to the Dr. Jason Roberts, who is here today, and a great expert in religious studies who have quite fruitful conversations. Jason, I can assure you that. And my colleagues from Bulgaria, I can see that more PhD students are joining today. Thank you guys for being here today. Thank you for supporting. And now we start with the game. First, in both historical studies and political science, there's the so-called deduction methodology. You start with the concepts, and then you'll fill the theoretical gap with case studies, and slowly go to the conclusions. Now, I'm going to get rid of this stupid methodology because this on-field research is a little more flexible in terms of concepts and notions. And I will start with the main concept of my research, which is radicalization. Now,
Hey, Iskren, I just wanted to ask you, can you go to slideshow view?
Oh, of course, Professor.
So we can see the slides a little bit bigger.
Okay.
There,
Okay.
Perfect.
So,
yeah.
what is radicalization? Now, if I say that radicalization is good or radicalization is bad, I'm not going to give an expert statement. I'm going to give a political statement. And what I give right now is an expert statement on what radicalization is. That's why first we should define, is radicalization good or bad? So we're going to play a game. And here I'm going to return back to this mode. So I will ask you to share with me what is the first word that comes to your mind when we say radicalization. Anyone? Radicalization. We will need 5 words here. Oh, I can see the chat. Plenty of words. Extremism, communism, politics. Okay, all right. Politics. Fine. Oh, Zach, thanks for joining us today. Let me see your extremism. That's fine. Okay. Indoctrination. And one more, please. One more, guys. I need one more. Terrorism.
Terrorism.
Terrorism. Thanks, Jason. That's a handsome word, terrorism, and quite popular these days. Now, let's define radicalization in terms of positive and negative connotations. Is extremism a positive connotation? Is extremism bad or good? It's bad. Okay. 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 Thanks. Is communism bad or good? Bad. Oh, Daria. Thanks. Okay, bad. Fine. Are politics good or bad? Okay, we can see here that they're both good and bad. No, that's all right. Okay, then I'll pick up here a 0, neutral. Boshidar, you're going to say me that communism and politics are the same. Think about it. I'm going to return to Bulgarian soon. Indoctrination is good or bad? What do you think? Bad. Okay. And finally, terrorism. I think that here, more than unanimous that it's bad. Look at how much minuses we have here on radicalization. So guys, you've just proved my thesis that radicalization is bad. Fine. We move on with political Islam. And we're going to play the same game here. The first word will be, come on, I need a hit here. Okay.
The first word describing.
Yes, political Islam. What's the first word that comes to your mind? Yes.
Radical.
Okay, radical. Thanks, Jason. Okay, theocracy. Thanks, Zachary. Emancipatory. Well, I'll write it. Thanks, Patrick. We move on with the next word. Self-determination. Okay, I'll accept that one, Michael. Thanks. Tension. Okay. Anti-Western. Okay, I think, okay, anti-Western. Okay, so let's try to elaborate this concept. Radical, positive or negative?
Say neutral.
Neutral. Why you say neutral, Jason?
Oh, that was me, as a matter of fact. But I just suppose that there can be a positive kind of radicalization and a negative kind of radicalization. No.
Okay. Okay. Neutral. Fine. Accept neutral. You know, majority rules, minority rights. Neutral. Theocracy. Is it good or bad, theocracy? What do you think? Europe. Would you live in a theocracy?
Negative, maybe.
Negative, of course, it's negative. We live in 21st century. Sovereignty is what we believe. Okay. Emancipatory. Emancipatory. Good word. I do agree, Mike. Positive. Thanks, Irena. Fine. Self-determination. Is it? It is positive. Tension. Are tensions and conflicts positive? Because conflicts are part of our life. That's my favorite part of the life, in fact. Okay. Negative, neutral, could be positive. Neutral, fine. I'm neutral here. Anti-Western. Oh my gosh. Positive or negative? Negative. 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 So what do we have here, guys? Oh, thanks, Jason. I will remember this. Okay. So it seems that political Islam is a problematic concept because we can see here that we have self-determination as part of the concept. We can say here that if radical, it could be a radical concept. It could be part of self-determination, but it can be also, it evolves into theocracy. Of course, in foreign policy terms, it could also evolve into anti-Western foreign policy. So allow me to operationalize this concept further based on my empirical experience. Back here. Fine. So, politics versus Islam. What's the difference between political Islam and classic Islam? First, jihad and the 5 pillars. Islam has 5 pillars. However, we know that the official thesis of Islamic State is that jihad should be also considered a pillar of Islam, because in 21st century, Islam needs to fight. However, we know from the theory of Islam that we have 2 types of jihad. In Arabic, it is jihad al-Khabir, which means the great jihad, the fight of each Muslim with the evil inside him or her, and jihad al-Sagir, which means the small jihad, the religious war. However, in the Quran and in the classic Muslim texts, jihad is not regarded as part of Islam. While political Islam advocates jihad as pillar of Islam. Second, political Islam advocates and, of course, encourages women to wear burqas from their young ages. In classical Islam, women should wear burqas when they are 18 years old or above. However, in political Islam, this is discouraged. Political Islam advocates the social exclusion of the dhimmi. What's the dhimmi? The dhimma.
Community of non-Muslims, right?
And in particular, Christians and Jews. Christians and Jews are regarded by Islam as people of the book, those who are protected by the state in the caliphate. However, political Islam abrogates this protection by saying that every subject of the caliphate should be subject to the Sharia. The takfirs. Who are the takfirs? Suggestions here, assumptions. This is the community of Muslims that are corrupt. And here is the biggest theoretical gap of radical Islam. Political Islam blames most of the Muslims that they have been corrupted by the Western culture, like people in Turkey, for example. I can say that that's totally inconsistent hypothesis, but according to the political Islam, this is like that. Political Islam also tolerates several practices as doing salah or namaz during office and working hours, which is strictly prohibited by the classic Islam. And here we have 2 doctrines that emerged as a result of political Islam. The Bin Laden doctrine that states that terrorists and terrorist organizations should be invisible. They should attack different targets in the West in order to achieve victory over the West. And the al-Baghdadi doctrine, the doctrine of the former Caliph of Islamic State, Omar al-Baghdadi, who argues that political Islam needs a state, needs to be a state actor. There is a big division between these 2 groups today. So tell me, this concept here, is it about Islam or it is just politics? can we say that that's not Islam, that's just politics? Because my thesis is that this is just politics. It has nothing to do with Islam, at least, from what I can read in the Quran and the sacred texts of Islam. Okay, I'll leave the answer to you. I continue with politics versus orthodoxy. Now, when we talk about politics and orthodoxy, we should know that the idea for the relation between these both is quite old. It dated back to early Christianity and the Byzantine Empire. However, in the end of 20th century, the beginning of the 21st century, there is a guy, Alexander Dugin, who became quite popular in Russia. He created the theory of the Orthodox metaphysics. The idea that orthodoxy can coexist with politics in a theoretical paradigm that describes the state. Dugin's theory provides a plausible starting point from his theory. However, Dugin draws inspiration both from antiquity and modernity. First, from Aristotle, by stating that Russia and the West are like the A and the non-A, like the dark and like the light. From René Guénon, a French philosopher who argues that today, 21st century, is a century of global crisis of values, Western values versus the Eastern values. Of Gilles Deleuze, who argues that the society is a chaos, that society is chaotic. Now, that's not Hans Morgenthau, that's not Kenneth Waltz, that's not Robert Jervis, that's Gilles Deleuze. He talks about society. And finally, we have Martin Heidegger, who is well known to the philosophers with his support for the Third Reich. What Heidegger states is that Logos is Christianity. And what Dugin further elaborates is that the Logos, the Christianity, is in an imminent confrontation with the chaos. Now, I'm going to elaborate this concept later. And finally, Dugin shapes and coins his concept by stating that Karl Haushofer is right in his assumption that behind every state there is a sacred theory. For example, Russia, the land of the czars, the US, the United Kingdom, etc., etc., etc. Now, we move forward with Dugin. Now, the theory of metaphysics is very interesting, but also quite popular in Bulgaria. The Heidegger's cleavage of good and bad and logos and chaos provides a starting point for the Dugin's theory. The centerpiece of Alexander Dugin's theory is that there is an imminent confrontation between logos and chaos. And this theory, this concept is justified. Its justification is based on 5 pillars. Pillar number 1, logos, Christianity, classical Christianity is dying. This is what Dugin states. Assumption number 2, there are good old chaos that was created prior to Christianity. You can say Greek mythology, paganism, etc. And bad, new chaos, the Western values, the postmodernism that was created by people after Christianity. Assumption number 3, the global liberal order is the center of deception. And the global liberal elites are the deceptors. Assumption number 4, the old chaos should replace the bad chaos. So instead going on with the Western values, with democracy and human rights, we should return to the pre-Christian roots of history. That sounds like anarchy to me. I don't know about you guys. And finally, the final assumption is that Europe is the logos, the United States is the red cows, the symbol of postmodernism, liberalism, etc. And Eurasia, that's the good news. It's the good cows. Only Eurasia can offer Europe what the United States can. So, we continue with the Bulgarian understanding of radicalization. Because here you're going to ask me, okay, but what's the common? I mean, oh my God, what's the relation between Dugin, Bulgaria, his writings, his philosophy, and Bulgarians? What's the relation between political Islam and the other part of the world, Bulgarians, etc. Now, I'm going to demonstrate my theory with two case studies. The first research was based in 28 municipalities in Bulgaria. What we did with my team was interview with 10 refugees from Syria and 10 foreign fighters. And here I want to emphasize that those foreign fighters were part of their own minority. No radicalization was detected among the Bulgarian Turks. I want to stress that here. Now, for refugees, Europe, Bulgaria is home, a safe haven in a scheme. For radicalized Bulgarians, I call Bulgarians because they are Bulgarian citizens, they are Bulgarians, thus they are Europeans. Home is not important relative. The mission, the cause, important. Second results of the interview. For the refugees, ISIS is responsible for the situation in the Middle East, not America and Israel. For the radicalized Bulgarians, United States and Israel are responsible for the situation in the Middle East. For refugees, Islam is religion, while for radicalized Bulgarians, there are two types of Islam. Corrupted Islam, the old Islam, the Islam of communism, and the new Islam, the authentic Islam. Next, for refugees describe Christians and Jews as friends, as dhimmi, while radicalized Bulgarians describe them as the people who believe in their own way. Okay, they're our friends, okay, they're our fellow co-citizens, but they believe in their own way. This is what I heard. Refugees describe democracy and rule of law as values that should be respected. And I want to stress here this word values, because this is what I heard, values. While radicalized Bulgarians insist that Islam is not a subject to democracy. However, refugees insist that religious pluralism is needed, while radicalized Bulgarians insist that religious pluralism discriminates Muslims. And finally, the final distinction is about education. While refugees point out that secular education is important, the radicalized Bulgarians point out that the state does not provide education. Professor Neuberger, who've been to Bulgaria, you know that the Bulgarian state provides equal opportunity education for all. Now, Bulgarian state does not provide many things for many people, but in terms of education, there is no such discrimination. Case study 2, observations of what happened in the Russian church in Bulgaria in the period 2011-2013, when Bulgarians were banned by the Russian chapel by the new president of the church. So what Moscow did was to send a new president of the chapel, the so-called predstoyatel. Jason, you understand me here. It's predstoyatel, or president of the chapel, the person who is responsible for the chapel, who banned Bulgarian language during service, who banned Bulgarian priests from serving. And unfortunately, the Holy Synod of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church defended the president of the chapel, while the state didn't. So what should be the strategy here, guys? Should we listen to the synod, to the church, or to the state? And here I'm going to ask you, what are you going to do if the First Amendment is violated in any way? Because that was the case here. That was exactly the case with Bulgarian people. And a few months after, the Russian patriarch visited Bulgaria, and there was a scandal because he declared that only Russia is responsible for the Bulgarian liberation, ignoring the fact that Russian troops in Bulgaria were consisted by Finnish, even there was a Japanese contingent. I'm saying that because I'm a wet immigrant. My great-grandmother fled Russia after the revolution for Bulgaria. I can say that because she said that. Next. However, who do Bulgarians consider radicalized? However, the Bulgarian understanding of radicalization is quite different. Bulgarians consider people radicalized, people who are mentally challenged, who are poor, who are socially excluded, who have low education, who are religious, who have bad family records or problems with drugs. And you can see how this hybrid strategy replaces the true agenda in the public opinion by a false agenda. The liberals are responsible for that. The socially excluded people are responsible. The mentally challenged people are responsible. I mean, and that's here the polarization between East and the West. So we have people who claim to be liberal, who belong to the old communist regime, and who want to take some money from American foundations and European funds, and who pretend to defend liberalism, and a few other bears who consistently talk how Russia and Bulgaria share common blood, religion, language, etc. Even so, Bulgaria made its civilizational choice in 1998 to join the European Union and NATO. Now, let's apply all this to US foreign policy and Russian foreign policy. I'm going just to elaborate here the Biden doctrine. It's a doctrine of reshaping smart power. Actually, US foreign policy today embodies a paradox of a short-term offensive strategy towards Russia and a long-term offensive strategy towards China. However, I want to stress the Balkans because this is the focus of our session today. And I'll start with the pillar one. Pillar number one. NATO and shared burden are the first pillar of US foreign policy in the Balkans. Now, those who know me, they know that I'm not a supporter of President Trump's doctrine, but I believe that he is right in his assumption that European countries should pay more for mutual defense. And if Bulgaria and other Balkan countries can pay more, I can't see why countries like Germany and France do not pay more for mutual defense. Second, democracy and human rights. Now, we're happy to have an ambassador like Farah Mustafa because she's very committed to democracy and human rights, something that is important to Bulgaria as every post-socialist countries. Not only freedom of religion and speech, but also freedom of self-identification, freedom of minorities, etc., etc. Rule of law, you can see that in the current election in Bulgaria. My students that are present here today can confirm that. It was a particularly successful election. Pillar 4, the US military strategy in the Black Sea and the assumption of the Biden administration that Black Sea will be the next starting point for countering the Russian hard power in Crimea. And finally, security cooperation, something that is detrimental to the bilateral cooperation between the two states. Something that, now we can see here. What's the balance of power on the Balkans? You have Bulgaria, that's a NATO EU member state, Romania, Hungary, Croatia, Slovenia, and Greece. And you have here the golden apple. You have here Macedonia, that's already a NATO member state. You have Serbia that joined the Eurasian Union. Kosovo, again, its status is quite identified. You have Albania that is not still EU member state. and Montenegro. And actually, the focus is not here, but the focus is rather here, the West Balkans, and here, Black Sea. Bulgaria, like a country on a crossroad, is in the very privileged position to be a key partner of the United States in this region. We move on with the Neo-Eurasian geopolitics. Russian foreign policy today embodies another paradox, the paradox of Neo-Eurasian geopolitics. Or this is Alexander Dugin's vision on Russian foreign policy. That globalization, Dugin argues that globalization is a dichotomous process. We have unipolar versus multipolar globalization. And the world is moving to multipolarity. And then there are two types of nations, sea nations and land nations. Sea nations are led by the United States, and land nations are dominated by Russia. China does not fit the picture. Confrontation between sea and land is imminent, according to Dugin. I don't know if you do agree that a confrontation could be an imminent or justified. If so, this theory lacks empirical robustness. Russian geopolitics, according to Dugin, is unique, neither Americanized nor Asian. Russia does not belong as culture, neither to Europe nor to China. I believe that there is some kind of like here because, current Sino-Russian talks are not so positive. They do not have so positive outcome for Russia and China. Russia is Eurasia, the rimland. So as Alfred Mahon said once, that whoever ruled the world ocean will rule the world. So the idea of Dugin is that whoever ruled Eurasia will have control over the world. That's why Russia should follow three lines in its foreign policy. The German line, to convince German people that they suffered enough during the Second World War, that Russia and Germany are both land nations, and they belong to the land nations, while UK and the United States belong to the sea nations. You can elaborate this scenario further. Line two, the Middle East, Russia and Iran. Iran to be used as a buffer against the Sunni allies of the United States in the region, plus Israel, because we can see now that Israeli and the relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia getting better. And finally, Russia and Japan, to prevent China to overtake the Far East and to use it as a starting point to Japan. Now, you know that Russia and Japan do not have a peace treaty since the Second World War. And this is the Eurasian utopia, the Eurasian empire. We can see here what's the grand design of the Eurasians. Now, this sign here in the center of Eurasia. Anybody, any assumptions here? Can you recognize the sign? I'm not digging into conspiracies. Yes, Jason, please.
Well, the compass rose in the middle is from the Eurasianist flag.
So it depicts chaos. The idea that the pre-modern understanding of philosophy, Greek mythologies, Scandinavian mythologies, is better than the Christian and then the Western, because the world is chaos. Therefore, Eurasia should fix the chaos. Okay, so let's apply Dugin's philosophy on Russian foreign policy. You have the Dugin doctrine here. Now, I believe that the Sino-Russian alliance is mission impossible because President Xi Jinping declined to sign an alliance with Russia. However, the foremost purpose of Putin is to consolidate Eurasia on a post-Soviet approach. Now, Russia divides the post-Soviet space into two: states that are member states of Russia and the member states of the European Union and NATO. Now, Russia will not allow to use hard power in these countries. It's written in the Russian security strategy. And the second line, the second can say it in that the second axis of states are those states like Ukraine, like Belarus, they're not member states of NATO in Europe. And Russia is free to use hard power in these countries. Now, the only problematic point are the Baltics, because of the Kaliningradskaya Oblast, which is in a very strategic point there. But the Baltics are another part of Russian strategy. I'm not going to elaborate that time further because we don't have much time. So the Balkans are divided into 5 zones. First, Bosnian Croatian zone, Roman Catholic zone, pro-US, pro-EU, Serbian Orthodox zone, pro-Russian, Greco-Romanian zone, pro-United States, pro-American, pro-European, Bulgarian, Macedonian, Orthodox zone. Russia still considers Bulgaria nostalgic of its past. And to some extent, I believe that Russians are right. But most of the people in Bulgaria are nostalgic of the socialist past because they were young, not because they like socialism. These are my impressions. I talked to a lot of people before coming here to Austin. And finally, Turkey is a NATO member state. There are assumptions, mythologies, legends that Turkey will betray NATO in favor of Russia. That's bullshit, because Turkey has already deterred Russia on the Balkans. Now, this is the Orthodox geopolitics under redefinition. You have the Russian Orthodox Church that is trying to seize this part here and the Baltics. And you have the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople, headed by His Holiness Bartholomew I. Now, you can see what's the position of Bulgaria. Of the patriarchates here and Russia. Bulgaria is a very important starting point for the Russian strategy here, especially in terms of religion. So, this is my last slide. What happens in Bulgaria? In Bulgaria, there are following narratives of radicalization. First, Islamophobia about the refugees. Those people are coming to Bulgaria because they want to provoke terrorism, because they want to, pervert people. Those people are not good for Bulgaria. I wouldn't say no, because from my conversation, from my interviews, I can say that there is a clear distinction between radicalized Bulgarians, those who were radicalized during their travels to Yemen and other terrorist camps, and refugees. So this narrative is fine. Anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, it is with great sorrow that I have to announce that in Bulgaria, anti-Semitism currently is rising. It's rising before, just because anti-Semitism in terms not only of course, Jewish matters or other minorities, but also in terms of sexual minorities. The situation in Bulgaria with the Convention of Istanbul, the so-called Istanbulska Convention, was a scandal. It provoked polarization into society. The socialist nostalgia is traditional. It's traditional because those people were young at that time. Now, I was a teenager when I was in my 19s, but in 1996, Bulgaria suffered the most severe economic crisis in its history. So should I dream of turning back to the 90s in Bulgaria only because I was a teenager? These people should think of younger generations instead of hurting their narratives. Finally, social society and the Western model, this idea that there is a confrontation, a polarization between both, that Russia can offer Bulgarians something more, even more than the West, to preserve its values, etc., etc. Russia and the liberation, of course, that's a historical fact, and I do not deny that Russia has a significant part in the liberation of Bulgaria. Neither I recognize that Bulgaria also have a significant part in the liberation, because I think that the Bulgarian liberation is a deed of Bulgarian people, not Russians. The idea that Bulgaria should leave NATO and European Union. That's not quite popular among the young generations because the support for NATO and European Union right now, Bulgaria is on 60%, so it's not a problem. Even in political parties, they get used to use this NATO and EU movement in their platforms. And finally, Orthodoxy. Unfortunately, we can see that there are people in Bulgaria. I will not call them theologians because they're not theologians. People who are employing politics and ideology are trying to deprive Orthodoxy and to transform it to nationalism and ethnophilitism. You're a good Bulgarian if you're Orthodox. If you're not Orthodox, you're Protestant, Roman Catholic, you're a spy, a Western spy, because you share another culture. Nice. So these aspects of radicalization in Bulgaria, you can see they're totally different from what I demonstrated in my interviews. And we can say that there is a total replacement of the real agenda by the false one. And this is what they call real hybrid warfare. To state that there is a real hybrid warfare is to go to talk to the people, to examine radicalization and polarization, not to talk to the TV how glory Russia is, how glory NATO is. These are well-paid experts, but they're not true experts. They're rather political faces who are trying to take some money from Russian or American foundations. And I can say that. That's why my research is self-funded. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. I'm anxiously expecting your questions.
I'll clap audibly so you can hear me. Okay, so thank you so much, Iskren. There was a lot in this talk, so a lot to think about. I just wanted to turn it to the audience and see who has questions. I'm kind of looking for hands up, but there's a lot of people. So any questions right off the bat? It's like Nuri Korkmaz has a question. Nuri, where are you?
Well, in Bursa, at home.
Merhaba Nuri.
Yeah.
Здравей, аз говоря на български без проблеми.
Добре, чудесно, чудесно. You know, I'm from Razgrad. That's why I'm particularly, attracted to this language.
Haskovo-born and Kırcalı raised here, so not.
Oh, excellent! Kırcalı is one of my favorite towns in Bulgaria.
Biz de Türkçe konuşabiliriz.
Okay.
Olabilir. So nice, increases unifying many languages and regions, actually. Very nice to hear all of you. Thank you very much.
Nice to see you, Nuri.
Good to see you too, everyone. I was listening to your presentation, Iskren, so and it was quite interesting to hear the interesting definition of old and new Islam. But, Bulgaria has, I guess, three different types of it, especially with the case of this radicalization of the, some, I guess, Pomak Muslim groups in the past. That was quite a huge case in the Bulgarian public, but nowadays they managed to overcome it. However, you mentioned the old Islam is the one that comes from the communism. Do you think that this is exactly a communist thing, or you mentioned the Islam that was constructed during the Ottoman past and managed somehow to transform and come to today's Bulgaria's, let's say, society? And the new Islam, perhaps, you mentioned the one that has arrived with the refugees, you said, or was brought by them?
Yes.
If I'm correct.
Sure.
But do you think that somehow this Islam has got something to do with the other types of Islamic denominations that are coming from the Gulf region, mainly, like, the ones that were tried to infiltrate through the these faith-based organizations that were helping or thinking of helping in the past in the Balkans from, let's say, from United Arab Emirates or Qatari organizations in the past? Or do they have something remained of that with the refugee movement. This was the first one. The second one is, you mentioned about Turkey, NATO. You said especially that this is ecumenical patriarchate, but you know, since I'm also working in Turkey, and just yesterday, Turkish and Greek foreign ministers exchanged very unpleasant conversation during the meeting in Ankara. And you know that Turkey does not recognize this patriarchate as to be ecumenical, as representative of the whole Orthodox Christians in the world.
And it's not the ecumenical patriarch is first among equals. Yeah. He's primus inter pares. He does not, of course.
But you know, they have quite a lot of problem also, that which you didn't mention, since they only their situation is across the street in Istanbul, Balat. You know, there is the Bulgarian church, and the opposite side is the patriarchate, and their relations are quite strained as well between the Bulgarian and the Greek churches there as too. And you know, right now we have very big discussion in Turkey building this canal in Istanbul in order to, and if this will consist of a breach of the Montreux Convention that is organizing the straight passage of the especially naval ships, which is nowadays discussed because of the Black Sea region and the strained relations, because US, as far as I know, sent 2 ships towards Turkey, and they said they might pass through the Black Sea as well. However, the Montreux Convention limits with 21 days the naval ships that could pass the Bosphorus and stay only 21 days in the Black Sea, and they have to exit afterwards. And nowadays they think that if Turkey would remain, which is, I mean, they're quite interesting position. I don't say that Turkey will betray NATO, but still the Turkish relations with the US are also very strained, and it seems a bit supportive of Russia. Nevertheless, saying that they totally support Ukrainian territorial integrity. And I don't know, I mean, what's your opinion on that? Because there is quite a bit different juxtaposes of this situation. And if you consider also Bulgarian political parties, because it depends
okay,
on
Nuri, that's a long set of questions.
Professor Neuberger.
Yeah,
We have other, sorry, I'm gonna have to cut you off,
Okay.
Nuri. I love you dearly.
Thank you so much. So this was the question in general,
right.
2 questions. First with the Islam and the second with the power relations.
Okay, all right, Iskren.
Thank you, Professor. Well, I will start with the first question. You know, Nuri, when we talk about Bulgaria and Turkey, it's a mess. I will say that one. Now, I asked a lot of people about Islam in Bulgaria. A lot of my friends in Razgrad and in other municipalities, in Kırjali, in Haskovo, and what they said to me is that the old Hodjas, Starite Hodji in Bulgaria, truly realized what's the importance of the peaceful coexistence between Bulgarians and Turks. They're the people who are responsible for this peaceful coexistence. They saved the Bulgarian nation from the notorious politics of Todor Zhivkov, called also the revival process. Those are the people who stood there, said both to Bulgarians and Turks, please, we should keep peace. We do not want a war. Unfortunately, these people right now are replaced by young guys who return from Saudi Arabia. In one of the villages, people rejected to give the key of the mosque to this person because they said, we want the old Hoxha. We don't want this guy. He's teaching something completely different. This is what they said. It's another fact that what Kemal Atatürk did has had its negative impact on Muslims, because part of his measures on religious people banned part of their practices, so deprived them from their privileges. So part of what Atatürk did was no different than socialism, because the Ottoman heritage is a consistent part of Turkey and should remain so. Turkey should not be ashamed of that she is an heir of the Ottoman Empire. It is indeed. It's like that. And second, about the great powers competition, Turkey is NATO. I wouldn't put my faith in people who believe that this buying of C-14 anti-missile defense from Russia will in some way shift the balance of power. Turkey is NATO. And I think that what happened, that was also notorious with this coup in Turkey, will not in any way hurt the balance of power in the region. Turkey is NATO, and Bulgaria and Turkey are strategic allies within NATO. Moreover, Turkey is the closest Bulgarian ally in NATO. This will remain so, not only because our old historical ties, but also because our common historical inheritance. I believe that this should be the starting point for our peaceful cooperation within NATO, and we can say to overcome this painful moment of Bulgarian history, the so-called revival process. So this will be the answer of my question, your question.
Thank you.
All right, I wanted to go on to Patrick Becker-Найденов. I've been monitoring the questions. You had one.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Just a second. Yes, thanks. Thank you very much for your talk. I have a question regarding, let's say, religiosity and spirituality among citizens and inhabitants of Southeastern Europe and Bulgaria. So don't you think, for example, for Russia, who has so explicitly taken a religious stance and a religious ideology coming from Christian Orthodox let's say tradition, it's somehow contradictory, because we can see in the southeastern European area that even there, although when comparing to Western Europe, youth and also older people show signs of, let's say, a regression of religion. So of course religion is higher there in Bulgaria, for example, than, let's say, in France or in Germany, but people are less religious in Bulgaria than outside of the EU, and are less religious today than they were 20 or 30 years ago. I mean, there are some studies, some longitudinal studies also. So my question then would be is like, how well are these, let's say, influences or attempts to influence people from the outside, let's say, for example, from a Eurasianist perspective on the Balkan, if people don't really believe in religion any longer?
Well, you know, there is we call it in Bulgarian, vzglas, during the liturgy. Show God your mercy for the pious and good Bulgarian people. Благочестивый православный български народ. I can convince you that most of the Bulgarian people are not religious, neither pious, neither благочестивый, neither peaceful, etc., etc. It's about superstition. I myself can see people coming to church. I can say that as an Orthodox Christian, I can see people coming to church just for a prayer or just to light a candle, because they believe that they should do that on the holiday, you know, but they do not know what's communion, what's confession. They do not understand these concepts. I believe my colleague here, Jason, understands quite well, better than them. I can say that. So I would say that Russia is using the idea for the Slavic, the Pan-Slavism, the Slavic idea for the Slavic universalism. Bulgaria and Russia together, bound by the common Orthodox faith. But what about the Bulgarian Muslims? What about the Bulgarian Jews? What about these people? They are also Bulgarian citizens. Now, and I deeply do not agree when they say, for example, the Roma in Bulgaria, these are Bulgarian citizens, and they're Bulgarians again. I believe that this influence is political, and that's why it's convincing and it's strong and successful, because it is a political influence. It is like in the political Islam. What this Orthodox, geopolitics of Orthodoxy does is to pervert the teaching of Orthodoxy in order to use it for political purposes. And as the president of South Korea said, from the division suffer people who are divided more than those who use the division for political purposes. So it's again the same. People in Bulgaria suffer because there are people who use Orthodoxy as a political tool, not as religion. You will not find these things.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.
All right, I want to move on to Jason Roberts' question. So we might be building on this same topic or theme here. Maybe not.
Oh, I think so, Dr. Neuberger. Thank you, Iskren. I'm going to try to I'm going to try to narrow my question because it turns out you and I are working on something very parallel with different approaches. You'll see next week just how much of it, but I won't go into that now. So I wanted to see if you could help me understand. I think if I followed the a sort of research question that it guides what you're doing, if I'm following, maybe it's just the part I understood well, was can current Bulgarian ecclesiopolitics be read in terms of the possible realization of Dugin's Eurasianist philosophy? So am I close? Right.
So you elaborate Orthodox politics as part of Dugin's philosophy.
Are you looking at what's happening in Bulgarian Orthodoxy in order to compare it to what Dugin wants to happen with Eurasia?
Definitely, Jason, because when you hear from an Orthodox Christian that war between the United States and Russia is imminent, I mean,
of course.
I know Bulgarian soldier.
So I appreciate that Bulgaria is along with Turkey, by the way, is absolutely, according to Dugin and according to the Eurasianist narrative for expansion, is crucial, right? Dugin wants to rope in, as you mentioned, Pan-Slavdom, and is also the Turkic super ethnos is one of the three that Dugin believes belong to
Gumirov.
Yes, well, Dugin as well has adopted the three, the Mongolic, the Turkic, and the Slavic, I believe. So then I'm interested in your instrumentalization of Islam, and I'll say I'm not a scholar of Islam. I have enough to do with Western Protestantism, Catholicism, and Eastern Orthodoxy to keep me busy. I'm working my way to it. But as I know Dugin's work and his sources, he does try to incorporate ideas from Islam, but it is Islam as filtered through first René Guénon, who was not a Muslim until the end of his life and then had some very particular ideas. And then Julius Evola, Dugin has since said he's much more a fan of Evola, who was a Dadaist, super fascist, ex-Catholic Italian who has taken Guénon's version of Islam and further stirred it together with hierarchical genetic caste system Hinduism to create the Islam of Dugin's imagination. So I wonder if looking at Guénon, and here's my question for you, if looking at the we'll call it Islam in quotes of Guénon and Evola and comparing that as one of your to what is happening, to what you're seeing as because I wouldn't begin to know how to divide Islam from political Islam insofar as, for my working definitions, all religion is political on some level. So it's safe to say, I think that Dugan is absolutely working with a version of Islam that may not belong to anybody other than Dugan, but he's at least written it out. So we could see if that is happening, right? Or have you done that and I missed the...
Okay, thanks, Jason. Well, I have an elective course in Islam. I teach an elective course in Islam for Erasmus students. So what I want to, but I'll start with Orthodoxy because this will be something like a common starting point. My answer. Now, you know that Alexander Dugin is not Orthodox. He's an old believer. You know that. Old believer.
To what extent?
Yes.
He claims to be.
He is old believer. Well, they split from the Orthodoxy in 1666. The sign. So, well, what he does with Orthodoxy is to create another artificial, actually, that his theory lacks any robustness. That was the theory of metaphysics, Orthodox metaphysics. So he does the same thing with Islam. He depicts Islam as part of the Asian religions. That's not like that. Islam is totally different from the Asian religion, from the Asian religions and from Asian cultures. And here is the biggest mistake of some experts to believe that Turkey will in some way, train on NATO because Turkey and Russia thinks like Eurasian empires. No, Turkey and Russia are very different, very, very different. Also in terms of religion and ideology. Turkey is a regional power of the Balkans. Now, I want to stress that because usually when people think about Islam, they also elaborate concepts like radical Islam and political Islam. I reject these concepts, both radical Islam and political Islam, because I think that, these 6 pillars and the other aspects of this political Islam ideology, that's simply politics. They take the religious doctrine of Islam and in some way put clothes of politics, adding some things that are totally irrelevant on what the Prophet said in the Quran. Totally irrelevant. I can assure you that because I teach an elective course in Islam for undergrads, Erasmus students. So what Dugin does, in fact, is to create a parallel theory of Islam. But this time, it's not Orthodoxy, this time it's Islam. This is Islam. This time it's Islam. So, because if you want to create a new religion, Eurasian religion, first you should deal with the old religions.
I had one follow-up for you. There is, oddly enough, a Lutheran bishop about an hour outside of Austin who has written a book on this. I'll send, it's James Heiser, and he talks about Dugin using Prisca Theologia and from the European Renaissance, this metaphysics that was meant to reconcile otherwise incompatible religious ideas. And he has addressed this specifically. Basically, he's tried to map what do you have to change about Islam, what do you have to change about Orthodoxy, and what do you have to change about Buddhism in order to make them fit together.
And to return to the old good cows, the pre-religious reality of the cows.
Right.
You have it now. Nationalism. Okay.
Okay, I wanted to let Sergio, is your last name Glajar?
Glajar, yeah.
Glajar. Okay. Go ahead and ask your question.
So this should be a little more straightforward, but it's more or less the same question as the one that I see now was asked in chat by Ivan Iliev about a connection between nationalism and religious extremism in Bulgaria. So I mean, I ask, my family background is Romanian, and I think as most people here probably know, in December of last year, a basically brand new far-right party won in a big shocking result, 10% or so of the seats of the Romanian parliament. And it's called AUR, Alianța pentru Unirea Românilor, which is the Alliance for the Unification
Romanescu.
of Romanians. Yeah, exactly. I mean, myself and a bunch of observers in Romania have already started to realize some pretty frightening echoes of the past. Obviously, I'm talking about the Iron Guard. I mean, this political party in Romania enjoys the support of the sort of rank and file clergy, of youth, of they have essentially famous philosophers who have become party ideologues. So I'm just wondering are there any sort of similar goings on in Bulgaria? Is there any meaningful presence of right-wing extremism? And as Mr. Iliev asked here, would there be any connection then between this kind of religious extremism we're talking about and a potential, I don't know, meaningful far-right presence in Bulgaria?
I understand your question, Sergio. Thank you. Well, yeah, unfortunately, affirmative, there is such influence, and it's again Orthodoxy inspired, because right-wing movements believe that Orthodoxy can serve as a political tool in order to deter Western influence. The nationalization and the politicization of Orthodoxy actually encourage these movements to spread all. But that's, and I will say it in religious terms, is a sin against Orthodoxy, because those people create a religious political amalgam of statements as assumptions that marginalize people, Roma people, Turkish people, other people in the society, and turn Bulgarians against these people. So, in fact, such movements work against the Bulgarian national interest because they polarize the public opinion. So yes, my question is yes, there are such movements. And even small parties, but they're fortunately not in the parliament. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Where'd you go? Christian, there you are. Do you want to ask your question that I saw in the chat?
First, I want to thank to Iskren for the very interesting lecture. My question is about the recent spy affair here in Bulgaria. What is your opinion on that issue?
Article 15 in the Bulgarian Constitution. Whoever spies in favor of another organization or a foreign adversary country goes to jail from 5 to 15 years. This is my opinion. These people, yes, these people betrayed their uniforms, their badges, and their country. They should go to jail. This is my opinion.
Thank you. Thank you. It was quite clear after all.
I know. There is a constitution, right?
Definitely. Because
Yes,
it not sound very, how to say, serious for the ordinary people. I mean, this kind of spies affair, probably most of the participants of the seminar are not familiar with it, but it sounds something, how to say.
Unfortunately. When you serve your country, you should serve your country with pride. Betraying your country results going to jail.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
All right, we have a question also from Steven Siegel.
Professor Siegel.
Wait, you're
so
muted.
Nice to hear from you.
Okay, there
Thanks.
you go.
Thanks, Iskren. I just came back from the dentist, so I'm going to mumble my way through this. I wanted to ask a question about your understanding of the environments where these discourses get produced. And I think it's really interesting for me to trace Dugin's performance art. I mean, it's very bad performance art, but it's the kind of discourse which finds a rapt audience among others who enjoy this kind of shock. And as shock and as performance, I wonder if it's similar in Bulgaria, if you can give us a kind of overview of the new and old media landscapes. Are there actual politicians who are taking Dugin seriously, or are there, let's say, Krushki, where, you know, he's just sort of dismissed out of hand as spouting a whole bunch of nonsense? I guess it's a serious question because there's so much really interesting work about the geography and geopolitics of the Eurasianists, and not just Dugin either. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. Look, Russia is a declining regional power that has no military capabilities to fight a hard, large-scale conventional warfare. And Bulgaria does not consider Russia a military threat because Bulgaria is NATO. And, you know, there is a myth in Bulgaria that NATO is not going to help Bulgaria in case it is attacked. Why? Well, I was in the capital where I met Tom Cotton from Arkansas, and I asked him, Senator, you're a big Republican. Are you going to defend Bulgaria in case Russia attacks us? What he responded was, we are loyal to our allies. So my answer here, Dr. Siegel, is that Russia does not have the potential to be a pole. It's a declining regional power. But Russia has a very strong point, and it is the Russian smart power. That's totally underestimated. That's underestimated by both European Union and the United States. The smart power of Russia is attractive, as attractive are for example, the speeches of the former caliphs of ISIS. It's the same. This idea that people have and share the common blood, and that's why they're destined to be together, is attractive. But it's more attractive to the old generation in Bulgaria. The young generation they do not buy this, you know, because they can see that much of the weapons of Russia are from 1985, first. And second, the only strong thing about Russia is their anti-missile defense. Besides, I do not believe that President Putin will risk a mutual assured destruction with the States or any Western power. So for Bulgaria, Russia is a declining regional power that is dangerous in terms of smart power, propaganda, and fake news, but not in terms of military.
Thank you, Iskren. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Devin.
Well, I guess as one final question, this Russian smart power really is frightening. There's been a lot in the news here, actually new discoveries every day about how it's working to help radicalize and create greater divisions within the US too. I guess what's interesting to me is that, you know, a lot of the Russian sort of goal behind that we've kind of seen is this idea of kind of, I guess, weakening the West and weakening democracy through creating internal divisions or fueling those kind of separatist divisions. But I guess my question is, like, a lot of these rise of a kind of radical right, I'm not going to address Islam because it's kind of a separate question, but we can see as a global movement with even explicit global ties and connections. But what's interesting is that in the Russian version of it, it's explicitly has this message of anti-Westernism and kind of bringing the West down, but yet we see those kind of deep ties throughout the right, which connect to Western radicalism as well, white nationalism.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how do they manage that, I guess? I mean, I suppose they domesticate the message, but there are direct ties between those groups, actually meeting in person and connecting. So how does, I guess, all that work, and how does that filter down into the Bulgarian context?
Thank you, Professor, for your question. Well, actually, my next research will be on white nationalism in Bulgaria, because this topic is very underestimated by the Bulgarian society. When we hear white nationalism in Bulgaria, it's like, wow, why white nationalism? Why it's not Islamic radicalism or something like that? These movements, etc., etc., etc. You know, that's. But what I think is that, again, the provocation or the centerpiece of this white nationalism in Bulgaria, its roots can be found in both aspects of Orthodoxy, the church who encourages this cultural clash, the Russian Orthodox Church who acts in Bulgaria on one side, and on the other side, these are the pro-Russian movements in Bulgaria. I think that Dr. Ivanov will be particularly useful here with the paramilitary movements. His new book is that focus exactly on these movements. I think that these two aspects, the paramilitary movements and the Orthodox radicals, actually fuel white nationalism in Bulgaria. They constitute the theoretical core of white nationalism in Bulgaria. While here in the States, as you said, there is still the problems with racial segregation, etc. In Bulgaria, it's about religion and paramilitary movements. But yeah, it's different. Unfortunately, what I lack in Bulgaria is the public debate about these things. Because in the United States, there is a huge public debate about racial segregation, about women's rights, about LGBT rights. In Bulgaria, there's no such thing.
Well, thank you so much, Iskren. I just wanted to thank everyone for coming. We had such a great turnout today, and these were really interesting and provocative questions. I hope we can continue to talk about all these in future Balkan circles. And in fact, next week, we're going to have Jason Roberts, and his topic will have some kind of connection to a lot of these issues. So I hope to see a lot of you next week as well. So thank you very much, Iskren. Yay.
Thanks for having me, Professor.